I want to pick up the thing that you mentioned, Jeff, about timing. The term which lies beneath translation means the critical moment. And in a way, Jesus' timing is exquisite in this scene. He doesn't come just for the sake of coming. There's also a matter of timing. We can ask the question, what if Jesus had shown up at the Land of Bountiful 3 days before he did at the temple? Well, there might have been a couple hundred people in town, but that's all. But by the time that the festival had arrived, the special day had arrived, it was packed, and he arrived. Same thing in here. People look for him, but he comes in an with exquisite timing, not as the world demands of him, but he operates with a different clock, a different calendar.
And I thought, too, in part, that from the very outset, that he's unable to walk in Judea because of the danger of the council trying to arrest him. And by his waiting, by his coming partway through, it's almost as if he just kind of slips in, and by then he's on the Temple Mount, crowds of people there. And
I like what you said, that there's been a buildup of anticipation, both good and bad, for his appearance. Now, why do they know he is going to show up, even though he's said, well, you go ahead and go? Why would he be there?
This is one of the feasts that is required by all males to attend. There'd be Passover and Feast of Tabernacles and then Pentecost. So it's demanded of him in the law to attend this feast.
And that, I think, they know he'll be there. Look at verse 11.
Yep.
They sought him. Where is he?
Yeah.
They're looking for him. They expect it, and he fulfills those part of the expectation. He knows he needs to be there.
In fact, that's the point I wanted to make, was that as a devout Jew himself and as the lawgiver, and this is going to become important later on in his discourse and as he's being challenged about the law, he is indeed abiding by the very law that they accuse him of breaking in some respects.
Look at the tension that keeps building in verse 12. Some say he's a good man, others say no, he deceives the people. It seems the closer you get to Gethsemane, there's a division that occurs, and it sharpens in these last few
In fact, as you say, it sharpens. Look at verse 13. Even though there's discussion out there among themselves as to who he is and what's he like and is he what he says he is, there's fear of being too open in their talk about him. And I'll notice it says there they won't speak openly because of the fear of the Jews. What fear of Jews? Who are they afraid of?
I don't know who, but verse 1 it says he wouldn't even go among them because they would kill him.
And again, I don't think it's just rank and file people that just don't like him. I think it's people of great influence that have great power that want him out of the picture, and that's what's going to come into play as we go on with this.
That certainly appears to be the case to me, and I think many of them are connected with the temple, a theme that David raised. This also ties back to Tabernacles. Solomon consecrated, dedicated the temple in his day at the time of Tabernacles. So temple, tabernacles are all very closely linked together, and it seems to me that becomes part of the critical time. Jesus arrives at the right moment.
That's good. Okay, look in verse 14, and I want you to share with me a little bit as he now arrives and he begins teaching, and he says, "Now about the midst of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. And the Jews marveled, saying, How knoweth this man letters, having never learned?" Well, what are they saying there? What does he mean? How knoweth this man letters, seeing that he's never learned? What are they really asking there?
Credentials.
Yeah.
I think they're actually after his credentials. Who is this guy from Galilee? We've never seen him around. He didn't study with me. He wasn't one of my professors or something. He wasn't on our faculty. And I very much suspect that's his credential. And of course his response will make it clear that his credentials come from heaven, not from some other human institution.
In fact, over in chapter 8, just skipping on that same thought, he said, "I'm only teaching and doing those things as my Father taught me." Yeah. He declares that doctrine back here in verse 15 and 16. My doctrine is not mine, it's from the Father. This is a unique individual. He's been specifically and specially tutored by God the Father himself.
This is one of those, if you look at the Joseph Smith translation way back in Matthew when we dealt with that, Matthew 3, he talks about how his knowledge, his teaching came from the Father.
Yeah, he was taught by no man.
Throughout this section here, he talks about that as a source of his information,
well,
his
and
education.
I think, we
comes
make a
from the
big
Father.
deal oftentimes about credentials, that you have letters after your name, and I think, this King James English of letters, this formal education, but among the Jews it would be that you would have studied with the great known rabbis, that you were known and your school of thought was known among them.
Why is it that men think education in formal school settings supersedes any education we can get from God?
Yeah, the worldly natural man, that we put man ahead of God. Well, I like what Brother Brown said, is immediately he tells them where his credentials are from, and not only does he say where my doctrine, speaking as Jesus, where my doctrine comes from, he then basically throws down the gauntlet to them too about finding out the doctrine.
And it's a doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The one who does
It's not just the
will
No,
know.
don't just learn
That's
it in
right.
the books.
That's
Mhm.
right. It's the doing of his teaching that carries its own proof.
Now, how does the law come into play here? We've already talked about him as a devout Jew, and he's going to live the law that is expected of them all. He then talks about his doctrine coming from the Father, but now he links it to the very law that they should be living, and that they call him into question and saying, you're disobeying. What's he saying about it?
He even questions them about their traditions. I mean, they're not even living the law. They're following the traditions they've added to the law. And down in verse 24, he says, judge not according to the appearance. The JST changes that. Judge not according to your tradition.
Now, what do we mean by traditions there? When he's saying traditions, that's not just, what you do on Christmas Eve in your family, that we have family traditions. He's talking about something specific with regards to traditions.
I think John, all of them do, but especially John. If you go back to John chapter 5, when he heals the man at the pool of Bethesda that's been lame for 38 years, that after he heals him, he commands him to take up his bed and walk. That when he heals the man in John 9, where he takes the soil and the spittle and kneads it and works it, according to the traditions, the Mishnah, there are 39 works that are unlawful on the Sabbath. Carrying your bed from one domain to another is one of those. Same with the idea of kneading on the Sabbath. So here he's done something contrary to what they've interpreted as appropriate on the Sabbath, and now they're here to call him on it, and it's
In fact,
causing this intense
and
friction.
they call him on it, and he calls them on it as well.
Let me add one more piece about this. The discussion of the law comes in an interesting context. Once again, we see layers in Jesus' discussion. Here are his accusers who seek his death, who are not obeying the law, which in a sense holds a standard up to them that they're not reaching. If they could surmount their own sin and could stand on the law as a foundation, they might see the celestial reality that he offers to them.
Which is the very intent for the law from the beginning.
That's
Exactly.
right. To lift them
But for
to
them, the
heaven.
law has become God.
Yeah.
The law is what they worship. They've lost
Or-
all sight of
Or
the-
we could even go a step beyond that, because when we say the law, they have added on the oral law, the traditions to it as well. So it's not just the law, because we would say Jesus is certainly obedient and respectful of the law, but what they've added on is all of the layers and the superstructure that goes with that.
Brent, this is a good thing to consider for us. We need to learn to distinguish between principles and preferences.